2:30 session. It is now the 2 o'clock session. My name is Sandar Gilman. I have a reputation for being an extremely nasty, very unpleasant coordinator of sessions. We will have 3 papers. The papers will be approximately 20 minutes long. I would love to have the time to discuss the papers at the end of the session, which is why I want to keep it down to an hour. We have 3 very distinguished speakers, all of whom need no introduction. I will, however, give them one anyhow. Our first speaker is Professor Bassam Tibi, who is a Professor of International Relations in Göttingen and A.D. White Professor at Large, which is a visiting slot, a term visiting slot at Cornell. He is by far the most distinguished commentator on Islamic fundamentalism, writing in English and in German today. He was part of the famed University of Chicago Fundamentalism project, and recently has published with Palgrave, Islam Between Culture and Politics. His topic today is Islamic fundamentalism and Western multiculturalism. Bassam.
Maybe I could make you laugh. You see, I have 12 years experience in German television, and I did not learn this at the German university. I teach since 1970, yeah? And at the German university, you have unlimited, as a German professor, you have unlimited lead time, yeah? And if somebody interrupts you, this is the highest degree of impoliteness, yeah? But in Harvard, they say, if you don't stop, we assist you to stop, and that was the message of Sandar, yeah? It is not Harvard, it's the Emory message. And in German TV, the CDF, they say, we just take the camera away. You continue to talk, but, I lost 1 minute, yeah? My topic is, or my assignment is to deal with the, so I should stop 33 or 34, yeah?
20.
We bargain in the math.
22. We bargain in Atlanta. You're now to 20.
But how about interculturalism? We meet in between. Okay. He's a nice guy.
I'm not actually.
My assignment is to deal with the interrelationship between Islamic fundamentalism and anti-Semitism. I am a historian, and I'm also a social scientist, but I'm also by training, I'm a philosopher, yeah? So I work as a historian and social scientist, and look at the issue from historical and social scientific perspective. But being educated in philosophy with Horkheimer and Adorno in the 60s in Frankfurt, this major philosophy put on my reasoning the requirement to elucidate the notions used. So people, use the notions, but then what are we talking about? Yeah. So to make my notions clear at the very beginning, I distinguish between Islam and Islamism. Islam is a faith, is an ethics. Islamism is a religion-based ideology in the pursuit of a divine order. I was a member of the Fundamentalism project at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We produced 5 volumes published by Chicago University Press, and there I learned to look at Islamism as a variety of religious fundamentalism. Religious fundamentalism is a global phenomenon. So this is the first distinction between Islam and Islamism. The second distinction is between Judeophobia and anti-Semitism. Judeophobia is very old. Anti-Semitism, in my understanding, and it is not only my understanding, I lean on Hannah Arendt. And Hannah Arendt, in her book on totalitarianism, looks at anti-Semitism as one major component of any totalitarian ideology, any totalitarian rule. And totalitarianism did not exist in ancient times, yeah? So it's something new. And therefore, I limit my understanding to anti-Semitism to the thinking of Hannah Arendt, and given the fact that she is also Holocaust survivor, then she is an authority on this. Judeophobia existed before, and it is based on prejudice, and it is a vice, to make it clear. But anti-Semitism, it is even greater vice. The difference between both is anti-Semites want to exterminate the Jews, to kill them, to erase them. And you find Judeophobia is also against the Jews, but not to this extreme extent. Yeah? My assumption is, when it comes to Islam, and again here you see I'm an adult scholar, but you see it's part of scholarship. You lean on authorities, but I have my own thought. The major idea in the presentation is my own. Yeah? But these are only preliminaries. Yeah? A further assumption is which I adopt from Bernard Lewis. He's a friend and mentor and also a teacher. Anti-Semitism has no roots in Islamic civilization. I say it again. Islamism has no roots in Islamic civilization nor in Islamic theology. This is the idea of Bernard Lewis in his book, The Jews of Islam, and I adopted. And he argues anti-Semitism has been an import from Europe. I have been working on this now in the past 2 decades, and I add to this, this import has been able to strike roots. It is no longer an import, it's much more than that. It's part, at the moment, it's part of the political culture. Unfortunately, we have to face it. Yeah? Judeophobia existed in Islamic history, throughout Islamic history, but not anti-Semitism in the modern understanding. My paper has 4 parts. In the first part, I present you the thesis, the major idea, which is mine, no authority. The second one deals with multiculturalism and anti-Semitism. In the third step, I deal with identity politics with regard to anti-Semitism. And finally, I come to my conclusion. Yeah? My major idea is that it is, there is an anti-Semitism. There is an anti-Semitism in the world of Islam, originating from an import from Europe, however, having become a part of the political culture there. And in the age of global migration, this import from Europe is now being exported into Europe, and it is a part of, unfortunately, it's a part of the Islamic diaspora. It's spreading in the diaspora, but it's very important here to distinguish again between Islam and Islamism, not only for scholarly reasons, but also for policy-oriented reasons. I consult politicians, and therefore I am not only a theorist. Yeah? If you suspect all Muslims of being anti-Semites, then you have 1.6 billion people against you, and you need allies. And the best allies against anti-Semitism in terms of efficiency are Muslims themselves. Yeah? And I am one of the allies, and I have established in 1994 with Rabbi Friedlander in London, in the synagogue, Westminster Synagogue in London, the Jewish-Islamic dialogue. And one of the concerns is to outlaw, not in Jewish, not in European, not in Western, but in Jewish-Islamic terms, to outlaw anti-Semitism. And we were in agreement, this is the most efficient way to do it. It's not only a policy, it's also conviction. We are both convinced of that. One of the major intellectual sources of anti-Semitism, intellectual anti-Semitism in the world of Islam is Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb, those who haven't heard the name, he was Egyptian, and he is the precursor, the one who invented political Islam or Islamism, and his writings today are spread around the world. Those of you who know the worker movement, the social movement of the 19th century, the Communist Manifesto was the inspiration, and the inspiration of Islamism are the booklets of Sayyid Qutb. I mentioned only 3 of them. One is Islam and World Peace, Al-Islam wa Salam al-Alami. One is Ma'alim fi al-Tariq, Signs on the Road. And the one which concerns us most here, Ma'rakatana ma'al Yahud, our struggle against the Jews. And if you look at these books, you find nothing about Palestine, because many people say Islamist anti-Semitism in response to Israeli politics in Palestine, but here it's an anti-Semitism in its own terms, yeah? And it's defined as an essential enmity between Jews and Muslims, ignoring Islamic history, ignoring Andalusia, where Ibn Rushd and my modernists were working next to one another, ignoring the history. If you look at the Crusades, we are in Jerusalem. According to the most authoritative source on the Crusades, Sir Russiman, a multi-volume book on the Crusades, Jews and Muslims defended shoulder to shoulder just the city against the Crusaders. The ideology of Islamism supposes or suggests that there's an alliance, a history-long alliance between the Crusaders and the Jews, and that's why they speak of a Jewish Crusader alliance against Islam. But in reality, somebody was talking about memories this morning. You have memories and you have invented memories, invented collected memories, and the invented collected memories are not in line with real history. In the real history, Jews and Muslims in this city were allies, and Jews paid dearly for it. The Jews were more, the Crusaders were more against the Jews than against the Muslims. They did not burn the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is still over there, yeah? But the major synagogue of Jerusalem was burned, and that was, according to Sir Russiman, that was the first time in history that Jews, about 1,700, they were burned alive in the synagogue as a punishment for their alliance with the Muslims. This is a real history. So, but therefore, in a Jewish-Islamic alliance for outlawing anti-Semitism, real memories should be recollected and not invented memories. In the second part of my presentation, I move to dealing with my multiculturalism. Unfortunately, I live in Europe, and I'm leaving Europe. But in America, it's not much better, yeah, in this regard, yeah? Because multiculturalism was born in America, not in Europe. In Europe, if you are a critic of multiculturalism, you are right-wing. I was one of the leaders of the student movement in 1968, and I was a Marxist for 10 years. Now I'm a liberal today, yeah? But liberal is not right-wing, yeah? But you see, because I published in 1998 a book, A Crisis of Multicultural Society, and I put forward a rational critique of multiculturalism, and that's why some people, unfortunately not all of them, they place me in the right, yeah? Or neocon. I have nothing to do with neocon, yeah? So multiculturalism, my understanding of multiculturalism, and this is not from my own mind, I've been studying the literature, multiculturalism is based on cultural relativism. And cultural relativism means no culture could provide value with universal validity. No culture. And therefore, one person from one culture has no right to criticize people of other cultures, even if they violate human rights. Those of you who are knowledgeable about history, they know when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was declared in 1948 in San Francisco, the first protest against it came from the American Association for Anthropology, and they called this declaration cultural relativism. I have difficulties of grasping this, yeah? But this is actually the cultural imperialism of the American anthropologists, yeah? Not of the United Nations. Because there are values which are human, that can be shared by all humanity, like primacy of reason. The idea of primacy of reason was shared by the Jew Maimonides and by the Muslim Ibn Rushd in the 12th century. And the ideas of human dignity, that people have natural rights, these ideas can be shared by the entire humanity. Multiculturalism is against universality, and they praise tolerance. Tolerance is one of the highest values of enlightenment, but there's a difference between tolerance and indifference. And in my view, the tolerance of the multiculturalist is rather an indifference, because they are indiscriminate, yeah? And they provide cultural excuses even for the violation of human rights. They talk about difference in their indifference, and about the recognition of difference, even if the difference is a violation of human rights. Yeah? To tell you a story, I hope some of you read the abstract included in the booklet, but a case in point for this multiculturalism and very, very limited understanding of humanism is in October 2000, two synagogues, one in Essen and one in Düsseldorf, were desecrated. And on the assumption that neo-Nazis were the perpetrator, there was an outrage in Germany. And then I'm not German, I'm not an ethnic German, but in Germany there has been a change. My young German students are not Nazis. So there has been the re-education brought a change. And this outrage that took place in Germany, throughout Germany, people were walking on the streets. How could a synagogue be desecrated on German soil? This that cannot be tolerated. And after 3 weeks, the police found out the perpetrators were not neo-Nazis, they were two Islamic fundamentalists, one Moroccan and one Palestinian. They brought to court, the lawyers were arguing in front of court, this is not anti-Semitism, this is only outrage about what's happening in Palestine. And the chancellor called at the beginning for the Aufstand der Anständigen, uprising of the decent people. And this uprising ended after 3 weeks, because if non-Europeans, if non-Germans do that, then we are multiculturalists. We try to excuse this culturally, find excuses, and we have no right to condemn it. And even in the court, these arguments were brought, and the people received a very slight sentence. If they were Germans, probably they were put in jail at least for 10 years. Yeah. So see, these things. This is the multiculturalism. I mean, I can provide you with 100 of examples because I have a file about this. Therefore, anti-Semitism has to be outlawed by its own terms, regardless where it originates from. Yeah? And in this regard, multiculturalists are for us are not allies in Europe in the fight against anti-Semitism. That was the second part of my paper, and the third part of my paper, I discussed cultural identity, and cultural identity has been seen this morning in some presentations in a positive way. Well, I care for identity. I argue there can be multiple identity, but what happens is in the diaspora culture, identity politics become ethnically exclusive. Take an example, the Turks and the Kurds in Germany. Yeah? Well, most of the Kurds, about 500,000, they are Turks. They have Turkish names. They speak Turkish. They have Turkish culture, and they create a kind of diasporic enmity between them and the non-Kurdish. We still have 13 minutes, right? Look, I watched. No, this is not true. This is a Rolex, and this is 20 after. I started 3 after, so we still have 13 minutes. Yeah? I'll just tell you a joke. I was a month ago. I was a meeting of the NATO in Ankara. There were 37 commander-in-chief. One of them is Peter Pace, the commander-in-chief of the American Armed Forces, and my chair was the commander-in-chief of the Turkish Army, General Özkök, and he stopped me 10 minutes ahead. Yeah, and I told him I still have 10 minutes. He said no, and I showed him my watch. This is a Rolex. Yeah. And that was televised in the news. And when I arrived in Istanbul the next day, he said, "Are you the Rolex professor?" Yeah. So the identity politics becomes an issue of inclusion and exclusion. Inclusion of the self and exclusion of the other, whatever the other is, including Muslims. If you go to Germany, in Berlin, in Frankfurt, an Arab does not go to a Turkish mosque. An Iranian does not go to a Bosnian mosque. So when you talk to the German society, they say, we Muslims. Among them, they have identity politics. You have identity politics in 2 levels. One is demarcating fault lines between the self and the non-Muslims. But within the community of Islam, you have ethnic fragmentation. And in both levels, on the one level, it's against integration into European society. On the other level is the fragmentation within the Islamic community itself. And therefore, we have to be very careful about identity politics. And I quote materials in my paper, like in Neukölln, this is a part, the district of Berlin. There are schools with the majority of Muslim students, and they say in German, "Hier kommt kein Jude rein." No Jews is allowed. And they say this is part of our identity. We do not mix with Jews. This is Muslim identity. I do not accept this kind of identity politics. Therefore, identity politics could be important to a certain extent, like in a colonial context, but you see sometimes in post-colonial studies, and I say this is very unpopular, most post-colonial studies are basically anti-Western, anti-European. And you see, I'm a Muslim, I'm Syrian as in Asia, I'm Asian ethnically, but there's an idea of Europe, and the idea of Europe is civil society, human rights, laicite, and I go for it, and I'm not willing in the name of post-colonial approaches of putting it down. And identity politics aims at putting down the idea of Europe, and I don't go for it. Yeah. In the last 7 minutes, I'm watching my time closely. In conclusion, but look,
We can compare watches.
I compared mine with yours, and yours was 3 minutes past 2, right? I showed it to you. Yeah, 3 minutes past, and I'm not good at an arithmetic, but if you add 30 minutes to 3, you have 33, and it's now 27.
20 minutes, my friend. 20 minutes.
Okay. So I come to my conclusion. In conclusion, I argue that I go for cultural diversity. Cultural diversity is something very important, and I have to apologize for you. I confused 20 or 30 minutes. Yeah? So you're right. So I will stop in 2 minutes. Yeah. In the context of global migration, and in the context of returning anti-Semitism to Europe, we, on the one hand, we need to acknowledge the need for cultural diversity. But cultural diversity is not a sacred coup. There need to be a limit to it. And we had a meeting about this in Amsterdam, and we talk about neo-absolutism and cultural relativism. If Europeans or those, who present the idea of Europe, and I present it, I'm not European, but if you go for the idea of Europe, and you are a cultural relativist, you are the loser if you discuss with the neo-absolutist. And therefore, I do not go for cultural relativism. I go for a universalism related to cultural diversity, but the cultural diversity should be related to a pluralism. Pluralism has two meanings. One, like in a party system, you have diversity, political diversity, and here you have cultural and religious diversity, but in addition, you have a binding agreement over core values. And one of the core values is to outlaw anti-Semitism. If you don't agree to this, then you have to live with anti-Semitism. Thank you.
We should thank Professor Tibi for being exactly on time. Our second speaker is Margaret Brierley, who received her doctorate from Cambridge. For many years, she lectured at Birmingham University on medieval and Renaissance German literature before taking early retirement. She has held academic posts in Jewish-Christian relations at the Selly Oak Colleges and at the Institute for Jewish Affairs in London. She teaches widely and has published most recently on the Holocaust, the Rwanda genocide, and the Armenian genocide. Whoops. Her talk today is the Anglican Church, Jews, Multicultural Society in Great Britain.
Thank you. Multiculturalism in Britain remains broadly popular. A BBC poll following last July's bombings by British-born Islamists was encouraging. Although 32% think multiculturalism threatens the British way of life, 62% of Britons believe multiculturalism makes Britain a better place to live. Significantly, there was no upsurge of racial intolerance following the bombings. British multiculturalism, which accepts non-assimilation, has great strengths. Its heterogeneity is enriching. London alone has Muslims from over 50 ethnic backgrounds. Its tolerant plurality permits composite identities rare in France or Germany. Yet commentators increasingly question multiculturalism. In 2004, the chairman for the Commission for Racial Equality argued that multiculturalism is out of date and no longer useful. It encourages separateness between communities and facilitates extremist indoctrination of young Muslims. In 2005, Kenan Malik wrote that multiculturalism as political ideology has helped create a socially fragmented tribal Britain with no political or moral centre. Others note that multiculturalism results in exclusion of poor whites and prevents integration. It encourages inter-ethnic tensions and ghettoization, especially of Muslims, into separate, semi-autonomous enclaves with high unemployment and social alienation. It renders Muslim women particularly vulnerable to human rights abuses, including forced marriages and honour killings. Melanie Phillips argues in Londonistan, June 2006, that the culture of equality for all minorities causes radical deconstruction of indigenous majority culture, including its religion. I quote Phillips, "The diversity agenda is a cover for an attack on Christianity." She argues that the multicultural ideology of victimhood, especially Muslim victimhood, has created a state of paralysis across British institutions, including the Anglican Church. Consequences are appeasement of terrorism, the inversion of aggressors into victims and vice versa, gradual Islamization, and, in Phillips's words, the increasing marginalization of British Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, and other minorities caught in a pincer movement between radical Islamists and a craven establishment that is pandering to Islamist extremism. Multiculturalism implies equality of all cultures in respect, in public space, and in public policy decisions. Some British Muslims now seek a privileged position for Islam, arguing that Muslims suffer a double victimhood of racism and Islamophobia. Since 9/11, and especially since Britain entered the Gulf War, there is evidence that, with government backing, Islam is, understandably, increasingly protected in state education, the media, and in some public bodies. Simultaneously, Muslim attachment to multicultural Britain seems to be lessening. Polls this year indicate that 25% of British Muslims have little or no attachment to Britain. 72% of those polled considered suicide bombing in Britain justifiable, while 37% consider the Jewish community a legitimate target as part of the struggle for justice in the Middle East. 7% of those polled considered suicide bombing in Britain justifiable. I apologize. Moreover, British Jews are affected by a global anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitic attacks in 2004 and 2005 were at an all-time high. For the first time, violent attacks on British Jews outnumber attacks on Jewish property. Anti-Jewish hate propaganda has permeated all levels of Muslim society. The perpetrators of anti-Semitism are increasingly Muslim youth and Palestinian sympathizers. The new ideological anti-Semitism, termed Judeophobia in 2003 by Kozmin and Igansky, fosters vilification of the state of Israel and Jews in general. Twinned with passionate anti-Americanism, Judeophobia, in their words, resides among cognitive elites within the news media, churches, universities, and trades unions. Since 9/11, a visceral loathing of Israel has crossed ideological and multicultural divides, uniting, in Kozmin's words, elements of the New Left, the far right, radical Islamists, anti-globalists, and human rights campaigners. Boycotts of Israel are one direct result. In 2002, the Association of University Teachers called for a boycott of Israeli academics, a call repeated this year by the National Association of Teachers in Further and Higher Education. Some branches of Marks and Spencer's are picketed. There have been short-lived boycotts of Israeli musicians and architects by their British counterparts. Jewish societies have been banned on some university campuses. The Anglican Church has lent its moral weight to this anti-Israel stance. In September 2004, its Anglican Peace and Justice Network, representing the 77 million Anglicans worldwide, toured Palestine and Israel, meeting Yasser Arafat, Palestinian church representatives, and Israeli Arabs, but no government officials. Their report, entitled "Give Sight to the Blind and Freedom to the Captives," was one-sided. It exclusively condemned Israel and its draconian conditions imposed on Palestinians and attributed violence solely to the occupation. By likening, quote, the concrete walls of Palestine to the barbed wire fence of the Buchenwald camp, it implied that the Jews of Israel are comparable to Nazis. The report recommended immediate dismantling of the separation wall, withdrawal of the Israeli army to pre-67 borders, unconditional recognition of the state of Palestine with Jerusalem as its shared capital, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees. This report and its recommendations were officially adopted in June 2005 by the Anglican Consultative Council. This, in turn, recommended to Anglican provinces worldwide a policy of disinvestment from companies supporting the occupation of Palestinian lands. In February 2006, the Anglican General Synod backed overwhelmingly a call from the Episcopal Church in Jerusalem and the Middle East to disinvest from companies, quote, profiting from the illegal occupation. The Synod's decision was later rejected by the Church's Ethical Investments Advisory Group, yet it remains hugely symbolic. being supported by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and coming soon after the election of Hamas in January. Lord Carey, former Archbishop of Canterbury, described the Synod's vote as disastrous, another knife in the back for already traumatized Israelis. The chief rabbi argued that Israel needed support, not vilification. His spokesman foresaw, quote, the most adverse repercussions on the long-established ties between Jewish and Anglican communities worldwide. The Synod's controversial call for disinvestment reflected parallel moves in the World Council of Churches and in the Presbyterian Church and United Church of Christ in the USA. But it also reflects a prolonged campaign against Jewish and non-Jewish Zionism by key Anglican clergy, including Bishop Kenneth Cragg and Colin Chapman, whose anti-Zionist books from the 1980s remain influential. In Justice and Only Justice, 1989, Canon Naim Atik of St. George's Anglican Cathedral, Jerusalem, formulated a Palestinian liberation theology founded on vilification of Israel as intransigent and arrogant. In Israel, he said, the centuries-old hatred of some Jews for Gentiles has been incarnated in their hatred of the Arabs, particularly the Palestinians. In his most recent co-authored book, Challenging Christian Zionism, 2005, Atik condemns neither Palestinian terrorism nor violence against Christians. He does condemn Christian supporters of Israel for what he calls their violent, very dangerous theology, which he claims promotes the massacre of millions of people. During the First Intifada, Canon Atik founded the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology in Jerusalem. Sabeel renews teachings of contempt for Jews and Judaism, which Vatican II had rejected, and invokes traditional anti-Jewish themes. Atik's Sabeel Easter message in 2001 suggested that, quote, Jesus is on the cross again with thousands of crucified Palestinians around him. The Israeli crucifixion system is operating daily. Sabeel vigorously promotes the divestment campaign and attacks Christian Zionists, who may number millions worldwide. Sabeel drew 500 international participants in 2004 to its 5-day conference against Christian Zionism. Sabeel's influence is especially marked in Britain, where its anti-Israel stance, like that of Christian Aid and the Anglican Living Stones Network, is becoming normative within the Anglican Church. Key Anglican supporters of Sabeel include Bishop Brearley of Jerusalem, Bishop John Gladwin, and Reverend Stephen Sznajder. Sznajder's writings and lectures are highly influential. His 2004 book, Christian Zionism, Roadmap to Armageddon, is endorsed by many leading British and American bishops, theologians, and clergy. Sznajder opposes Christian support for what he calls rabbinic Judaism and for Israel. He caricatures Christian Zionism as, quote, a theological endorsement for racial segregation, apartheid, and war. Its consequences are, quote, pathologically destructive and include, quote, tacit acceptance of ethnic cleansing. Sznajder's theology of covenantalism is essentially anti-Judaic replacement theology. Quote, the church is Israel renewed and restored in Christ. Sznajder denies that Jews are, in his words, the authentic children of Abraham apart from, through faith in Jesus Christ. He denies any validity to Judaism, quoting the leading Anglican evangelical John Stott, quote, to suggest that the Jewish people continue to have a special relationship with God apart from faith in Jesus is biblically anathema. Stott, too, rejects Zionism absolutely, saying, I myself believe that Zionism, both political and Christian, is incompatible with biblical faith. This is strong stuff and hugely influential. The Anglican Church traditionally tolerates dissent and embraces a breadth of theology and political views. To my knowledge, only Christian support for the Jewish state and for rabbinic Judaism has been thus anathematized by influential clergy. There are several contributory causes. Within Anglicanism, replacement theology teaching that Christians are the true Jews still thrives. Indeed, Bishop Brearley claims that Palestinian Arab Christians, I quote, are the true Israel. Abraham is never spoken of in the Bible as a Jew. Jesus, in this line of thinking, was a Palestinian. Unlike Roman Catholicism, the Anglican Church has never renounced mission targeted at Jews. CMJ still seeks to convert exclusively Jews, while Jews for Jesus operated from John Stott's own church. The established church, haunted by post-colonial shame, is uneasy about nationalism, especially Jewish nationalism. Yet prayers, focused sometimes almost exclusively on the suffering Palestinians, almost part of weekly litany in many churches, create strong sympathy for Palestinian nationalism. The Anglican Church morally condemns the treatment of Palestinian Christians and Muslims by the Jewish state, yet for decades has been virtually silent on the persecution and large-scale massacres of Christians subject to jihad in Muslim states, notably the Sudan. This, in part, reflects long-standing influence of Middle East clergy reluctant to condemn Muslim oppression for fear of reprisals against Christians. Yet, its multicultural environment also affects the Anglican Church. Inner-city clergy faithfully serve dwindling Anglican congregations and parishioners who are often nearly all of other faiths, especially Islam. Many clergy participate in interfaith dialogue and passionately champion inter-ethnic harmony, especially since 9/11. Yet at national and local level, the perceived influence of the Anglican Church is declining. Although 60% of Britons identify themselves as Anglicans, practicing Muslims may already outnumber practicing Anglicans. Some demographers and Muslim leaders believe that by 2013, in 7 years' time, British Muslims will number at least 5 to 6 million, approximately equaling the total number of active Christians. Anglican chapels in hospitals and prisons are being transformed into multi-faith prayer halls used mainly by Muslims. The Royal Commission has recommended reducing the number of bishops in the House of Lords from 26 to 16. The Prince of Wales, future head of the Church of England and advocate of Islamic spirituality, wishes to be known as defender of faith rather than defender of the faith of Anglican Christianity. Lord Carey has just urged that the next coronation should be multi-faith rather than exclusively Anglican. Conversions to Islam increase rapidly, especially among elites, celebrities and prisoners. 17 years ago, the Anglican Church officially encouraged renewed dialogue with Judaism. It urged Anglicans to show, quote, a willingness to listen to the partner, to try to see with their eyes and feel with their heart. Yet now, the dialogue partner is far more likely to be Muslim than Jewish. Dr. Edward Kessler, director of the Cambridge Centre for the Study of Jewish-Christian Relations, warned in June 2005 that, I quote, the Anglican-Jewish common mission is in jeopardy. He argued urgently for new Anglican-Jewish initiatives. These have not so far materialized. On the contrary, there has been a radical move away from affirming Jewish roots towards fostering alliance with Islam as a fellow Abrahamic faith. This seismic shift within the Anglican Church reflects a post-9/11 British fascination with Islam. It is cemented in a new Christian-Muslim seminar created by leading Anglicans. Entitled Building Bridges, it was inaugurated in Lambeth Palace soon after 9/11 in January 2002, convened by Lord Carey, then Archbishop of Canterbury. Church House publishes its lectures in book form. Building Bridges gathers dozens of Christian and Muslim leaders and academics annually, quote, on a basis of equality and mutuality. Its first proceedings, called The Road Ahead, a Christian-Muslim Dialogue, 2002, stress, quote, the shared journey of Christians and Muslims, the importance of deepening dialogue and understanding, especially following 9/11. The papers, which are diverse and fascinating, suggest at times equivalence, even unity, between Islam and Christianity, despite any differences. Bishop Kenneth Cragg, for example, states, Magnificat and Allahu Akbar are the sure doxologies with which our two faiths begin. In the mystery of our created human trust, he muses, two faiths are one. Professor David Kerr portrays Christian-Muslim relations as a single circle, a shared human community of faith, eschatologically united in the struggle, jihad, to discern God's purposes. Kerr explains radical Islam as a form of liberation theology. Another new venture, the Anglican Al-Hazar Joint Committee for Dialogue, was finalized, ironically, on 9/11. Its remit encourages Anglicans to understand Islam and vice versa. In January 2006, Rowan Williams, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, launched a third initiative, the Christian Muslim Forum, as its founding patron. The forum is explicitly, quote, designed to help us think not of a clash of civilizations, but of a shared religious humanism. This realignment of Anglicanism with Islam has political consequences akin to those of multiculturalism. Like British politicians and senior policemen, one of whom stated last year that Islam and terrorism don't go together, Anglican clergy very carefully distance Islamist terrorism from the Muslim religion. The vicar of St. Pancras Church, near one of the London bombings, told his congregation, "There are no Muslim terrorists, there are terrorists. Jews may be marginalized." Preaching last November at the memorial service for victims of the 7/7 bombings, who included several British and Israeli Jews, the Archbishop of Canterbury mentioned neither the terrorist religion nor Jewish victims. I quote him, "It does not matter to the killers if their victims are Christian or Muslim, Hindu or humanist." This Anglican yearning for reconciliation is noble, and it is absolutely essential to foster good Muslim-Christian relations. Yet it is important too to recognize the ideology and power of dawah, Muslim proselytizing and mission. Muslim multiculturalists are now calling for a radical post-multicultural agenda which would marginalize and eventually emasculate Anglicanism and ensure eventual demographic Muslim supremacy. Yasmin Alibai-Brown urges the disestablishment of the Church of England, the repeal of the blasphemy law which protects Christianity, and withdrawal of funding from all religious state schools. Religion, she argues, should not be practiced in any state-funded school. 35% of primary schools, 16% of secondary schools are faith schools, nearly all of them Anglican or Roman Catholic. Professor Tariq Modood recommends replacing the Anglican Christian link with the state by a pluralized religions state link. Alibai-Brown further argues that British foreign policy should be steered towards adopting the Muslim-oriented agenda and that Muslim polygamy should be legalized. Kalim Siddiqui, founder of the Muslim Parliament, envisaged, like some other Muslim leaders, that the majority population will accept Islam. Britain, Dar al-Kuf, the land of the infidel, will become eventually an Islamic state. Even some moderate Muslim leaders, including the late lamented Zaki Badawi, designate Britain as no longer as Dar al-Had, the Ahd, the domain of contract, but as Dar al-Islam, within which Muslims undertake a hijrah parallel to Muhammad's withdrawal to Medina. This may potentially have worrying implications for multicultural Britain. It might encourage further withdrawal by some Muslim communities from aspects of Britain which they deem kufr, infidel. It might even encourage more British-born terrorists and the tiny minority of Islamist radicals who preach terror. For it was during the Hijrah that Muhammad began his elimination of pagans and Jews. A few extremist Wahhabi preachers now redefine even non-Wahhabi Muslims, but also Christians and Jews, traditionally protected dhimmi, as mushikrun, as polytheists who can be killed. In Britain, Abu Qatada and Jamaican convert Abdullah el-Faisal have urged their followers to kill Jews. The Islamist radical Abu Hamza, who recruited key al-Qaeda terrorists, was jailed last February for inciting murder and race hatred. He taught that Allah decrees further torture for the Jewish people, I quote, "The Jews will be destroyed, the state will be destroyed. Killing a kuffar, unbeliever, for any reason, you can say it is okay even if there is no reason for it." Abu Hamza urged stabbing, which he called the needle of bleeding the enemy, as the first stage of jihad. The current spate of random stabbings in Britain is doubtless unconnected. But it is an urgent reminder that for Britain to remain a heterogeneous, stable and tolerant society, all incitement to terror and murder must be outlawed. The Anglican Church needs to stand strong on the rock of its biblical faith and core Judeo-Christian heritage and values. In affirming Islam, it should reaffirm the importance of Jewish-Christian relations. For in the long run, violent radical Islamists, like Abu Hamza, intend multicultural Britain to become a monoculture, perhaps rather different from tolerant Anglicanism. Thank you.
Our final paper, and then we'll open it up to discussion from the floor, is by Professor Mario Sznajder. Professor Sznajder is the Leon Blum Professor of Political Science at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a research fellow at the Truman Institute for the Advancement of Peace. He is the author and editor of articles and books on fascism, on anti-Semitism and politics, on human rights, and on Latin American and Italian politics. And it is in the last arena that he will address us today, on anti-Semitism, national identity, and the fascist legacy in Italy. Professor Sznajder. I'm going to let you come through and then I'll sit down.
Thank you, Professor Gilman. Yeah, and first I'd like to thank Professor Robert Wistrich, the director of the Vidal-Sassoon Center, for the study of anti-Semitism, for the invitation to participate in this panel, although I feel a bit alien, still I try to make a case about anti-Semitism in a different way. I'll cut my paper into half, more or less, and what will not be understood, I hope to reply in the questions if there are. Undoubtedly, the Alleanza Nazionale, AN, I'll call it, led by Gianfranco Fini, has traveled a long way from its origins in the Movimento Sociale Italiano, MSI, the neo-fascist movement, to its electoral triumph in March 1994 and to its incorporation into the Berlusconi governments of 1994 and 2001. Abandoning anti-Semitism and adopting a clearly pro-Israeli position were used by the leader of Alleanza Nazionale, Gianfranco Fini, as a propaganda tool in the distancing himself and his party from historical fascism. In spite of all the maneuvering done in order to achieve political legitimacy and sound democratic credentials, little space has been opened for the others, immigrants, foreigners, non-Italian and non-Catholic minorities in Italy, in AN's definition of national identity, since no real and total rejection of fascism from A to Z, as any democratic partisan will have no difficulty in expressing, has not been done by Fini and Alleanza Nazionale. The idea behind Fini's proposal of change was to transform the AN into a moderate right-wing political party similar to the French Gaullist or British Conservative parties. The political logic of this move was to try and attract the votes of those that in the past went to the Christian Democrat Party, to the right-wing electoral coalition led by Berlusconi and to its own party if possible. Within the context of post-war Italian political culture, this could be achieved only if democracy and liberty were accepted as basic values central to the ethos of the majority, which for 50 years kept the communists, as well as the fascists, out of power, until both parties seem to have reformed into democratic forces. Here we must ask whether the AN acceptance of the democratic system and the value of freedom has come as a result of an ideological debate, or is it a rhetoric exercise for the purpose of obtaining the needed political legitimacy in order to be part of the next governing coalition? Much criticism has come from hardcore fascists in the Movimento Sociale Italiano, people like Pino Rauti, Mirko Tremaglia, Teodoro Buentempo, and others, who could not accept the swift abandonment of the basic long-held values of fascism, have criticized Fini and his moves. But the most interesting criticism comes from Marcello Veneziani, editor of Italia Settimanale and a philosopher of the New Right. Veneziani claims that the cultural debate around the transformation of neo-fascism into a liberal democratic movement has been of a low standard and rather opportunistic. His view is that Fini has profited from favorable circumstances, enabling him to introduce the radical right into mainstream Italian politics. This same line of criticism was expressed by Piero Ignazzi, the main expert in Italy on Alleanza Nazionale and on Fini, when he declared prior to the March 1994 Italian national elections that AN was a bluff, a mere set of initials for electoral purposes. No transformation has taken place because there has been no internal debate on the guiding ideas, and they remain those more or less, of fascist tradition. Although the condemnation of racism and anti-Semitism was generally perceived as a positive sign of democratization within AN, it still raised doubts among some observers. Primarily, they saw it as a reaffirmation of the already existing strong revisionist trend in neo-fascism that divides the history of the movement, of the fascist movement and regime, into two periods. First, the period of, between virgula, good fascism until 1938, when many positive steps were taken to strengthen the Italian state and through it the nation. And second, the period of, between virgula, bad fascism, when mistakes were committed, such as the alliance with Germany, enactment of the Russian laws, and entering the war. This explanation is used regularly by neo-fascists when referring to the racism and anti-Semitism of the past. The acceptance of the motion condemning racism and anti-Semitism in the Fuji Foundational Congress of AN in 1995 led to internal contradictions in the newly adopted position of AN, for instance, in the reverence shown at the same time by the supporters for the memory of Giorgio Almirante, who happened to be Gianfranco Fini's political godfather, and was the deceased leader of MSI and I said political godfather already. Mario Pirani, a political analyst, points to the fact that nobody seems to remember that Almirante was the editor of La Difesa de la Razza, a strongly racist and anti-Semitic publication, and also chief of cabinet of the Ministry of Culture of the Salon Republic, who was responsible for the rabid anti-Semitic journalistic campaigns during the persecution of the Jews in Italy between 1943 and 1945. Pirani recalls also that the fascist leaders who opposed the racial laws, like Federzoni, Balbo, De Bono, and De Marsico, were condemned to death in absentia by the same regime which spawned most of the founders of the MSI, of the Movimento Sociale Italiano. Thus, while formally the condemnation of racism and anti-Semitism was incorporated into the statute of AN, no serious debate on the roots of fascist racism and anti-Semitism had taken place. In the name of political realism, the thesis claimed that a correct reading of Italian political history of the last half-century shows how fascist state intervention, totalitarianism, was replaced by total party intervention, partitocracy or particracy, which gave birth to clientelism and corruption in post-war Italy. Only by adopting and stressing de Maistre's formula of authority and liberty as the foundations of Western democracy can the profound anti-democratic undercurrent in this kind of ideas be forgotten. Political realism is exemplified through the circle of intellectuals who guide the ways of the right and of Alleanza Nazionale. Distinguished members of this circle quoted in the AN draft programs include Ernst Junger, Wilfredo Pareto, Gaetano Mosca, and Robert Michels, the later three fathers of modern political sociology, but all sound enemies of liberal democracy. Giovanni Gentile is mentioned because of its humanistic opening while forgetting its ethical imperative and totalitarianism. Ugo Spirito is remembered for his social suggestions without reference to state corporativism. The extreme nationalists Giuseppe Prezzolini, Giovanni Papini, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, Ardengo Soffici, Gabriele D'Annunzio, and Giulio Sevola, a distinguished Nazi, are all recalled without specifying their contribution to the radical right. Alfredo Rocco is quoted without mentioning that the great jurist, is quoted as a great jurist, was the author of the various fascist, highly coercive legal codes. Giuseppe Mazzini, Enrico Corradini, and Benedetto Croce were all figures that influenced the formation of fascist ideology and are also mentioned as intellectual fathers of AN, etc., etc., etc. There are many, many others, and I think it's unnecessary. The essence of this intellectual baggage is that authority is a primary psychological need without which social cohesion cannot exist. In a democratic framework, authority is government that are limited in the same way as liberty, another primary need that has to be restricted in order to prevent social life degenerating into arbitrariness or chaos. It is interesting to observe how these principles reflected in the internal organization of Alleanza Nazionale. As Piero Ignazzi points out, the organizational changes in the party that would reflect the new democratic spirit are more cosmetic than else. The party can be called Caesaristic, as it is marked by the verticality of power structures in which the president, Fini, the leader, cannot be removed by the directory or the National Assembly of the party. The National Directory of the party is nominated by the president and ratified by the National Assembly, while half of the Assembly's 500 members are also nominated by the president. These are small examples. No? In general, the reform proposal and programs of AN under the leadership of Gianfranco Fini may seem alike those of other nationalist or conservative parties in democratic countries in Europe, but this is a superficial reading. Still, Gianfranco Fini, the unquestioned leader of a party that has not lived through any process of internal democratization or purification from fascist believers and sympathizers, has acquired much political legitimacy. All this without Fini openly rejecting fascism from the beginning to the end as one of the main antitheses to the liberal democracy he so much wants to be part of. Fini himself has served in the second Berlusconi government from 2001-2006 as Deputy Prime Minister and since 2004 as Foreign Affairs Minister too. Here we will claim that Gianfranco Fini has used anti-Semitism, or rather the rejection of anti-Semitism, and his relation with Israel is very friendly relation with Israel as a tool in order to achieve political legitimacy in a political exercise based on superficial historical revisionism and playing between internal social divisions and international criteria of political acceptability. Let us remember that Gianfranco Fini still declared in the early 90s that Mussolini was the greatest statesman of the 20th century. He warmly received Jean-Marie Le Pen in Rome, spoke about fascism being alive, and was apologetic about those who fought for the Repubblica Sociale Italiana, stating that they were defeated by arms and not by history. Let us point to the fact that Fini has no past record of open anti-Semitic declarations. Therefore, he's becoming, between virgula, repentant of anti-Semitic fascist past, of the anti-Semitic fascist past, especially of the Italian racial laws of 1938, and more so of the persecution and extermination of Jews under the Republic of Salò, does not stand in contradiction with previous personal attitudes and declarations. Fini's rapprochement with Judaism and with Israel sometimes presides and sometimes works in parallel with his taking distance with the fascist past of Italy. The explanation is probably related to a very complex picture composed on one side of the need to be politically correct at the international and Italian internal levels, and on the other side with not losing the fascist vote. Gianfranco Fini's strategy can be regarded as a long-term one in which wide internal and international political legitimation is a sine qua non. After the collapse of the Christian Democratic Party and its replacement in government by a new formation, Forza Italia, led by Berlusconi, of rather personalistic characteristics, the leader of AN saw a window of opportunity that will only widen with the passing of time, as it has happened lately. Fini did not take personally part in the first government of Berlusconi. He and other AN personalities paid a certain price at the international and even internal political levels of being ostracized as former fascists. At the level of political propaganda, the idea of crudely relativizing the fascist past into two periods, a positive one until 1938, a negative one from the racial laws in 1938 and until the fall of the fascist regime, was logical and practical. The main differentiation point was established around fascist racial legislation, a point around which most of the potential voters of AN coming from the Christian Democratic and other parties would agree, since anti-Semitism in the 1990s was rather low in Italy. Inside the MSI-AN, matters were different. Surveys show that between 1990 and 1995, the percentage of MSI-AN middle elites level that agreed with phrases like too much financial power at the hands of the Jews was steady at 47%. Still, as mentioned before, the control of the party apparatus and the fact that the condemnation of anti-Semitism was led by popular figures made it for Fini possible in the Congress of Fuji in 1995 to officially begin rejecting anti-Semitism by Alleanza Nazionale. The question to be asked is, why didn't Fini reject fascism from A to Z, and concentrated so many efforts in befriending the Jewish community of Italy and Israel? The answer is political, at the tactical level, and very simple. Since most of the core of AN supporters still see with more than sympathy fascism and the fascist regime, such a rejection of fascism would have implied losing a huge amount of votes. Let us remember that as late as 1998, more than 61% of the supporters of Alleanza Nazionale thought that fascism, apart from some questionable decisions, like the racist laws, was a good regime, and another 3% thought it was the best regime, while 18% thought it was an inevitable response to communism. While alienating such large groups of supporters would be like committing political suicide, and remaining publicly within the neo-fascist parameters of the MSI was also impossible, another venue was needed to get out of the impasse. Therefore, the problem of taking distance from fascism is, between virgula, solved by rejecting its publicly most unaccepted aspect, the racial laws and anti-Semitic persecution and extermination. Historical revisionist maneuvering adds weight to this exercise, and thus both the rejection of anti-Semitic features of fascism as well as support for Israeli policies allow Fini to perform his much publicized first visit to Israel in November 2003. In this framework, presented as an expiation act, Fini is received as a real friend of the Jewish people and of Israel, getting the legitimacy stamp he so sorely needs for internal and mostly international strengthening of his democratic credentials. If the main victims of Nazi fascism welcome and approve Fini, and therefore the political party that has sent him to the Italian parliament and government, Alleanza Nazionale, who in the Western liberal democratic world can question his taking distances from historical fascism? Publicly eliminating anti-Semitism from the AN repertoire has another advantage. It allows Fini and the more conservative elements in the leadership to control in a more effective way the nostalgic burden now limited to internal repositories and not let it burst out politically. Still, after the phases of claiming to forward direct democracy between 95 and 97, then the second phase in which free market modernization coupled with protecting national identity, which is something we don't really understand how it could be done in parallel, between 1998 and 2000 was proposed, Alleanza Nazionale turns into a program of identity and security in which it recovers some of the old ideas of the Movimento Sociale Italiano, such as the cult of law and order, the guiding role of the state in the economy, and the exaltation of the social bonds in the national community that leave again little space for migrants and aliens, as well as for multiculturalism in Italy. Let me finish by telling you that this, coupled to the changes in programs and lack of small changes in the programs and lack of stability of the political cultural messages of Alleanza Nazionale, still cast serious doubts about the quality and depth of its distancing from historical fascism. The use of the rejection of fascist anti-Semitism and the friendship towards the Israeli government as tactical political tools fit very clearly in this model, and I think do not require further explanation. Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes. I'm going to open it for questions. Could you please use the microphones? Otherwise, you're not going to be picked up on the webcast. And please, I'm not going to try to keep notes. Please then get in order in the mic as you wish to speak. So line up is what I'm saying. Please line up. Madam, please.
Thank you very much for the panel. It was very informative. And I have a question to Professor Tibi. I'm also an Arab like you are, Muslim background. And I have two questions. We can sing the praises of Spain, but that's in history, and it could have had its own circumstances of why Arabs and Jews in that particular part of history got along. We cannot deny that present day Islam and the Arab world is right now doing to this small state Israel the ultimate anti-Semitism. Do you mean that by mentioning the period of Spain, do you mean that the natural condition of Islam under normal conditions, is it the normal situation to be in good terms with the Jews, or is that an exception? Because my culture does not get along with the Jews. They are very anti-Semitic. And the second question is, who is going to enforce the law? When you mention we have to make anti-Semitism against the law, who's going to enforce this law? The UN, the Arab League, Arab dictators? Who would enforce it? Europe cannot even protect themselves anymore. In the United States, we have laws against anti-Semitism, but you find it on college campuses, on professors, students. Islamic student organizations that I meet on every college campuses are extremely anti-Semitic. And they are using Western freedom of speech. Actually, they're using our freedoms to promote anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
Awesome. If you're going to answer, please answer using the podium.
I'll be very brief. Actually, there's no disagreement. There's rather misunderstanding. In my paper, it's made clear Islamism is. I wrote a book about it. The Neue Totalitarismus is the new totalitarianism, and anti-Semitism is one of its ingredients. So the new anti-Semitisms come basically, and I'm sad to say that, but it's the truth. The new anti-Semitism comes from our civilization. Yeah. In referring to the history, I'm against all nostalgia. So I had so much limited time. So that's why. Number one, the history is a model in Andalusia. Muslims and Christian and Jews lived peacefully with one another. But this is not a model for the future. Yeah, because among us is Bat Beor, and I agree with her in her book that the Jews lived as dhimmi in Spain, and this cannot be accepted for the future. So, but as I'm not talking about governments. I can talk only for myself. Yeah. When we established, I have limited time. When we established the Jewish Islamic dialogue in London, one rabbi stood up at the very first minute and he said, "We Jews are grateful to the Muslims who protected our lives in the medieval time, yeah? And we are grateful for this. However, we live in the 20th century and we want to be a sovereign nation. If you accept us as a sovereign nation, not as dhimmi, we can continue the dialogue. Otherwise, I kindly ask you to leave our synagogue." I never heard such words from the mouth of a bishop, a Christian bishop. I have 20 years experience in Christian Islamic dialogue, and I ask the dialogues behind the curtain, you have to do it. I cannot do it for you. You have to say, we don't want to be a dhimmi. Then they say, this would disturb the dialogue. I said, what kind of dialogue are you? One of the requirements of the dialogue among equals. So the second question, it's easy. Outlaw in English, I wonder whether you are a native speaker of English, but outlaw of English is not illegal. It's not a legal notion. To outlaw something, it is unethical. So I'm not talking about laws and enforcement of law. To say ethically, anti-Semitism is a vice, and we have to counter it. This is not a legal issue. So this is an issue for ethical people, for opinion leaders, for the media, and this is what I meant. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
My question and observation is to Professor Sznajder. The most interesting litmus test for who is who in Italy towards the Jews came in the march against Ahmadinejad last year. Who did not march? Fini's, at least his party, marched. Who did not his party march, La Ruspa marched there? Who marched? He couldn't, he was the minister. La Ruspa marched. Who did not march besides Rati? Only one totalitarian group, the communists, who are part of today's government. Bertinotti, unrepented communist, is chairman of the chamber of the Italian parliament. Who has repented in Italy? Well, the socialists have disappeared, fortunately enough, so they cannot repent for Craxis Siveris, a man who, the prime minister who had to flee the country because he was such a major thief. The Christian Democrats have not repented for all the money they have stolen. The communists who are repented, who now call themselves socialists.
Bring it to a question, please.
So, please, why do you speak about one totalitarianism and not about the other, neo-anti-Semite totalitarianism, that of the Communist Party, which is part of the present government?
Well, I mean, otherwise you don't get picked up on the web. I apologize for the technology. Yeah, they're doing this as a web.
Thank you for the question. I can do a very long argument, and I think I can destroy one by one the pseudo-facts you have placed here, but I will not do it because out of respect for the public in general. I'll tell you that I know personally the discussion around Gianfranco Fini's participation in the march against Ahmadinejad. He didn't do it. Ministers of other denominations participated in the march. Yes, sir, they participated. And now he didn't do it because he was then foreign affairs minister. But I don't think the issue is about the Italian policies towards Iran. I'll just tell you one thing, that speaking with Italian diplomats the other day, one of the things they observed in sound international political analysis, how much standing Italy lost since Fini became foreign affairs minister from an Italian point of view, not from an Israeli, Jewish, anti-Semitic, etc., etc. Now, why did I concentrate on Gianfranco Fini and on Alleanza Nazionale? I did it because I am a student of fascism, and this is the area which I study. The paper is not about the Communist Party, the paper is not about Craxi, it's not about Italian corruption. Believe me that I can tell you many stories, and I can tell you many other stories about very terrible things related personally to Fini and to the ongoing anti-Semitism in Alleanza Nazionale today. And I can tell you about the Fini speaking in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem and being asked by a journalist, by an Italian journalist from La Repubblica, whether he thinks fascism is total evil. It's not that he declared that. He was asked and he said yes, and very reluctantly, and the day after I saw with my own eyes in Porta Porta. Porta Porta is a main interview program in Italy on TV, main rating. Fini returning from Jerusalem, returning into historical revisionism and claiming that fascism was good in certain senses and bad in other senses, therefore annulating what he said the day before or what the journalist forced him to say. But this is a political exercise, and I'm not judging him personally. I'm just trying to explain what he did and why he did it. And believe me, it is so.
I'll just remark, by the way, one has to say that Mussolini did make the panels run on time.
So
Mussolini did make the panels run on time. Yes.
My question is for Margaret Brierley, but before the question, I want to thank you for a very detailed tour of a very troubling horizon. A few years ago, a Holocaust Remembrance Day, perhaps not under that title, was instituted in Great Britain. Within the context of your talk to us today, could you sketch in just very briefly what was behind the creation of that day? And since its creation, can you tell us a little bit about the Anglican Church response to it and the response of people in the Muslim communities in Great Britain? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. It resulted from the precisely what Yehuda Bauer was talking about with the Stockholm process. It was from within government. Tony Blair backed it, the Home Office backed it, and so indeed did the Church of England, who appointed me as an honorary advisor, and I was on a couple of the Home Office committees from 2001 until 2004, which were creating and planning Holocaust Memorial Day. I have to say, since its inception in 2001, it has been a tremendous success. I created packs which were used in many hundreds of churches across the country. There has been a special task force for local government, and many, many town halls across the country have themselves created special events which sometimes number many hundreds of people commemorating Holocaust Day each year. Other genocides are acknowledged. It is absolutely fundamental that is so. The Armenian genocide is not officially acknowledged, but all genocides since 1945 are, and survivors, where possible, are always invited to participate. I think it has been an unqualified success, with perhaps the exception that, sadly, although a few individual Muslims do take part, by and large, the official Muslim leadership has boycotted the Holocaust Memorial Day, as far as I'm aware, to the best of my knowledge, on the grounds that there is a genocide of Palestinians which is not acknowledged in Holocaust Memorial Day. There have been pressures to resist that. I believe that that will continue to be resisted for any kind of inclusion in Holocaust Memorial Day.
Thank you.
Yes, my question also goes to Dr. Brearley. I would be interested to know how you see the specific position of the Anglican Church within the World Council of Churches, and especially from the background of the special relationship between the Anglican Church and the Episcopal Church in the United States. Do you think that these Anglican positions you have described are very specific, or is it rather similar to other positions within this Council of non-Catholic Christian churches?
I cannot comment in detail on the relations between the Anglican Church and the World Council of Churches. They are certainly cordial, and I'm sure that the Anglican Church has a very considerable influence, given particularly its membership of 77 million worldwide, within the churches. To the best of my knowledge, the moves within the Presbyterian Church and the United Church of Christ are separate, distinct, and they're not necessarily influenced by the moves of the Anglican Church, but of course will be reinforced by them. Certainly there has been a very considerable influence from the Middle East Council of Churches, where there are, in which there have been some fairly strongly anti-Israeli Anglican clergy in positions of influence, who have influenced in turn the position within the Anglican Church in Britain. But more than that, I'm not in a position to say.
Margaret, don't go away. My question is for you too. I know some of the story that you were telling, but the part that caught me by surprise was this sort of lingering supersessionism amongst the Anglicans about the Jews. And what's so startling about what you're describing is essentially a situation in which, by continuing to harbor this supersessionism about the Jews, they are, on the one hand, turning their backs on the Jews and throwing themselves into the arms of people who are supersessionist about them. So this is a kind of suicidal deed. And can you explain I mean, I understand supersession, I just don't understand suicidal supersessionism.
What's the rationale behind it?
I think that nuance would probably elude most of those who are supersessionists. I don't fully understand it myself. It surprises me, particularly because this has been officially, categorically rejected within the Roman Catholic Church, both theologically and in terms of preaching. I have to say, I was for several years a judge of one of the judges of the Times Preacher of the Year award, and it was not all that uncommon to encounter supersessionism in sermons, particularly by Anglicans. I don't understand it myself. One of the greatest and earliest champions of Jewish-Christian relations was James Parks, an Anglican clergyman who became fully aware of the history of Christian anti-Judaism in fostering wider anti-Semitism and indeed in having a route into the Shoah. I suspect that his work simply, and the work of later thinkers, has not been as all-pervasive as one might have hoped. Certainly, I don't think that it entered the theological training colleges to the extent that the rethinking within the Catholic Church did enter its seminaries. But to be honest, I don't have a rational answer for it. I think that the fact that mission has not been renounced must be one contributory factor, because they go hand in hand together. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
My question is directed at both Bassam, Tibi and Margaret Brierley, and derives from personal experience, particularly in Great Britain, and to some extent in Germany. Whenever I have been asked, either in an official capacity or just as a lecturer, to speak in recent years on the subject of contemporary anti-Semitism, there are two arguments that are invariably brought up by people who resent the raising of the issue in the first place. One is, of course, the Palestinian question, and the claim that whatever anti-Semitism does exist is merely a byproduct of the conflict that is going on here, and therefore, because Israel is automatically perceived as the party that is guilty, the responsibility falls back on the Jews. The second argument, and this is what I want to ask, is to bring up the question of Islamophobia, to insist, and I think Bassam Tibi was more than hinting at this, that you cannot discuss today in a multiculturalist environment, supposedly, in England, Germany, and many other European countries, the issue of anti-Semitism without, at the same time, and parallel, discussing Islamophobia as if they are to be equated, put on the same footing, or in reality, Islamophobia being elevated over anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism itself ultimately being, in some sense, relegated or treated as a subordinate issue. But my question is, how do you see, in the case of Margaret, this issue being played out in the Anglican Church and that milieu, and in Germany, how have you encountered this, also as an academic, a scholar, and a public figure?
Why don't you and then Margaret? Yeah. Is that right, Margaret?
In the case of Germany, both issues are related to one another. Yeah? I have experience, I know you come frequently to Germany, and in earlier years in the 90s, if you switch television on, you see my face. Yeah? And that I was a major commentator for Islam in the Middle East in CDF, yeah? And I was columnist of the Frankfurter Allgemeine for more than 13 years. Yeah? And I was taken completely out of the media. So almost 99% due to this thing. There is no need, there's a consensus, no talk about this issue. Yeah? If you talk about it, you are poisoning the atmosphere. You are poisoning inner peace within Germany. And then there are some pseudo-truths are established, and if you question them, you are then outlawed. Yeah? One of them is, I have been working for 30 years academically on Islamism, and my work is translated in 16 languages, but it is not accepted in Germany. Yeah? The common truth in Germany is Islamism, Islamic fundamentalism. They don't like the term fundamentalism. They say Islamism. Islamism is a response to Israeli politics against the Palestinian. And when I mentioned the beginning of Islamic fundamentalism is 1928, when the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was established, and there was no Israel, there was no Sharon, nothing. Yeah, they don't want to listen to that. Yeah. And then I relate this to the second issue, and I start with the anecdote. If you want just 1 minute, I was a close friend of Ignaz, the late Ignaz Bubitz, and Ignaz Bubitz was approached by a group of Islamists. Well, they say there is no Islamism, we are Muslims, and they asked him to establish a Jewish Islamic alliance against anti-Semitism and against anti-Islamism. And Bubis was a very intelligent man. He had an assistant, and he asked him to do some research, and he found the name of the organizations represented by those people in the Jahresbericht Bundesamt des Verfassungsschutz. Those who don't speak German, there's an annual record published by German intelligence about extremism, and these organizations were listed there. And he said, then he called me, he said, you have to come today, and I need you. And I came to Frankfurt, and I told him, he said, explain this to me. I do not understand it. He said, the issue is, the rationale is the following. These people, and I know some of them, they are distinctively anti-Semite, yeah? But they are not scrupulous, and they have no scruple to talking to a Jew like Bubis, because they are pursuing the strategy, and the strategy is the following: you equate Islamism with Semitism, say we are also Semites, and then those who are anti-Semitic, they are also anti-Islamic, and those who are accused of anti-Islamism should be treated the way anti-Semitism is treated. And as you know, Robert, as somebody who knows Germany very well, unlike Britain, unlike France, anti-Semitism in Germany is strictly outlawed, also legally, not only ethically. So if somebody is accused of anti-Islamism, then he's finished, and you can silence him. And you see, I am a Muslim, I'm practicing devout Muslim, I come from the family of the Prophet, and they try to put me in this, you see, I'm an anti-Islamist, I'm against Islam, and even more, I'm a hidden Jew. I'm not a Muslim, I'm a hidden Jew, and this is why. And I said, Bubitz, keep your fingers, halt die Finger raus, yeah? Keep your finger away. And he said to them, no, there will be no alliance, yeah? So the link between number one is political correctness, silence, censorship, and to equate anti-Islamism with anti-Semitism is a weapon for silencing the critics of Islamic fundamentalism.
I'm going to give Margaret Brierley the last word, and I apologize, gentlemen.
I have to say that I think in Britain that the churches have had a rather good record of interfaith relations. The interfaith network was established in the 1980s. There has been Christian-Muslim dialogue for many years. And there was a lot of outreach, especially after 9/11, and again, especially after the July bombings last year. Immediately, clergy sought out Muslim leaders and community leaders in order to stand alongside them in fellow sympathy to make sure there would be no backlash against Muslim communities. I heard the Commissioner of Police speaking last year precisely about this very soon after the July bombings, and he said indeed there had been no increase, partly because of this. I myself am a member of the advisory board of the Three Faiths Forum, which is a leading Christian-Muslim Jewish group, which again opposes Islamophobia. So I think that by and large, the church has a very good record on this. There is also a phenomenon of Islamophilia. Almost an idealization of Islam, which certainly has been in the West since the 12th century, when Wolfram von Eschenbach wrote a major German work idealizing a Muslim hero. Lessing did exactly the same thing in Nathan der Weise, in order to show the Western churches how they needed to be self-critical. And one of the certain consequences of the last 5 years, since 9/11, has been increased self-criticism within the churches. Incidentally, one of the leading Islamophilia representatives in Britain was a Cohen who became a Jesuit, and the more he became a Jesuit, the more he emphasized his Cohen-hood, and he became a leading Muslim scholar and promoted Islam very strongly within Britain. How's that for multiple identity? What one does find, however, is that there is relatively little knowledge of or understanding of Islamism. I have read widely inside Qutb, Maududi, Al-Afghani, and other Islamist thinkers. And I find myself in a fairly unusual position in that relatively few other non-Jews whom I know have taken the trouble to do so. And therefore there is not the awareness that there should be of the power of Islamism and its agenda and the arguments that it uses. And I think that it is essential that there is greater understanding for this particular ideology coming from Qutb and Maududi, which, in my opinion, does contain seeds of potential genocide within it and should be warned against. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll do a coffee break and then the next session. Thank you.
Thank you all.